Hello and welcome there to another episode of the Cliff Notes podcast, where we ask a leader and find a way. Today I'm joined by Gary Ramsey, and we're going to talk about digital transformation. How are you doing today, Gary?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Where are we talking to you from today?
Well, I'm in Dallas, Texas. It's a great day here. It was interesting yesterday. They actually sent out a what to do in case of a tornado. That's the kind of weather we were experiencing yesterday, but beautiful blue skies with puffy clouds in Dallas, Texas.
Jolly good. Weather's warming up a bit here, but I don't think we'll top out the same as you manage it on average. That's great. So I was interested to sort of get a bit more of an understanding before we get into sort of the main topic. What's your background to this sort of manufacturing space?
Well, I'm actually a degree computer science engineer, going back several years. And I'll say several years, we actually punch cards, if anyone understands what that is these days, especially when you combine that with digital transformation. It seems like it's a long time ago when we interacted with computers in that manner. But I've actually had the privilege of working for several manufacturers of hardware, digital equipment corporations, Sun Microsystems, also with Intel, and currently with Avnet, and that was through an acquisition that just happened back in January, and we can talk about that a little bit more later, just on how Avnet's trying to really provide I hate saying this, but one throat to choke when it comes to an IoT solution, hardware, software, just all the way through from ideation to end of life. So, and then I was, along my journey, I consider myself a wantrepreneur. I actually had a company back in 2008, just a little bit early, in IoT, where we were providing a lot of the services that Avnet actually does today, but just a little bit early in the whole IoT space. We got involved in some very large projects, but as we know, what kind of happened there with the economy in 9, 10, and 11, it was hard to hold on to a company at that particular time, starting in what we're actually calling today digital transformation, IoT. There's a lot of bright and shiny words that come around these days for technologies that quite frankly, I was trying to build out with my company over 10 years ago. So, but now it's out in the forefront, and I'm very excited about that. I really consider myself a visionary in the industry, just having experience in all types of different industries and various different technologies. And it really started back when I was in college, where I saw the hardware guy come in and pack up his bags and leave and say, yeah, it's a software guy. And he came in the next day and watched him tinker around, and he got up and left and said it was a hardware guy. And I thought, wow, there's a real need for someone to understand both sides of that equation. And here we are today. It's called IoT. You really need to understand the whole product cycle of IoT, from hardware and sensors and gateways and communications protocols, then understanding how that's going to affect the enterprise and connecting all that data flow so that management can look at dashboards and reports and so forth and glean insight they've never been able to see before because of this newer technology of digital transformation.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like your head was certainly in there and being inspired to move forward. But like you said when we were talking before, that you were a little bit ahead of the market, and you had to take a step back and then realized I was doing what I was meant to be doing.
Exactly.
No, that's great. Just to peel that apart, I mean, how do you see? Is there a difference between digital transformation and IoT, or are these things that just sort of blend between each other, and one's a process and one's a space?
Well, I guess let's define digital transformation to some extent, because what I've found is when you start talking about digital transformation, people think of that as an IT thing. And we can always talk about the transformation that's happened in IT, where we actually had legacy systems and data centers, and we used things like waterfall processes. A lot of the enterprises were set up with siloed departments and so forth. And IT was considered an overhead. And just the whole way of how processes were driven back then, and discrete manufacturing, and just the way we reported data out and so forth. Everything was centralized in the IT department. It's not just IT. It's really a whole business mindset. And I think that having the experience of being involved in startups and taking that whole startup mentality is really what digital transformation is all about. Digital transformation is really, as I said, it's not a tech thing. It really involves different ways to approach business processes without looking back at the traditional methods that we used to use. It's about adopting change and just allowing new ideas and looking for insight that your information, that your people, that your customers are going to expose to you. You've got to have your ear to the ground. You've got to listen. The management has to change. And the whole process of the experience itself around digital transformation is really just super hyper awareness of understanding what's in the organization, and being an informed decision maker, and then being able to do fast execution. So it really is what you see in a small company and how agile that company can be. They bring products to market quickly. They make fast decisions. That's okay to make a mistake, because that's what the agile process is all about, is learning from that mistake or running out in a certain direction and finding out that's not necessarily the right way to go and making a quick course correction. So digital transformation really starts at the management level. It's a mindset change. Management has to view the whole organization to some extent like a startup, and I keep coming back to that. But having that experience back at 10 years ago, the word digital transformation wasn't necessarily out there, but we've kind of grown into this startup mentality within an organization. So if you start looking at just how IT comes into that equation, you no longer look at IT as a data center. It's everything's moving to the cloud. I talked about the digital, the agile development, or DevOps. You're building ecosystems around yourself today, trying to figure out who you're going to work with, not just what connects to what API connects to what system. It's a relationship also with the different organizations that you plan to work and build around. IT is now looked at as a revenue generating department. Why not? Why not make money with IT? And I can go into lots of different use cases, but what I find is organizations that are traditionally not IT driven are out hiring computer engineers to write software. And it's just a complete different mindset, again, with this digital transformation concept. And the thing is, you've got to be able to adopt change. Change is what digital transformation is all about. It's not changing of IT systems, it's change of mindset and how the organization runs. You've got to let the data, through customer feedback, through employees, the data that's the insight you're getting from all the different sensors out in the field, your legacy systems, grabbing all this data and putting in a big, massive data lake up in the cloud, and using AI to help you find certain things. With the with artificial intelligence today and machine learning and this whole concept of data science, just process mining, looking at all this data that's coming into the organization and looking to see what that data is trying to tell you. Most people think that their processes are linear. You start off with A, go to B, to go to C, and so forth. You just kind of look at let's say a customer calling into your call center, and they get routed around to 15 different people before they get their answer to the question that they're looking at. It's the same process that's happening within your organization, whether that's routing of packages, routing of information, routing of purchase orders. If you can look at that whole process using process mining or data science, you can find out where those exceptions are coming in and smooth out those exceptions so that you've got just a whole linear process within the organization. So hopefully I'm answering your question there. I think I went off on a little bit of a tangent, but as I said, it's just a whole different mindset within IT now and the organization itself.
Totally. I mean, just to bring it back there, I feel I'm an IT person, but I see this as very much a people and processes change. It's that's where the focus is. The IT and stuff starts to become a transparent enabler. It's just something that is helping this transition, but it's really about making the people and processes, like you say, operate like small and large companies where I've worked, and these sort of agile and lean processes that we might have been familiar with just to get the technical task done, and moving out into the business processes to stop the larger divisions, the larger companies being stuck in their own ways and their own business, because whole paradigm is shifting, not just the work. And you're going to get left behind if you can't iterate fast and be able to see what things are going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the representation of DevOps is the infinity symbol, right? There's no beginning and no end,
mm-hmm.
and that's really what this whole thing's all about, right? It's trying to determine. We think this is the direction to go, but the data or the feedback that you start receiving within the organization or from your data streams are going to help either validate or tell you to stop, turn around, and go the other direction. So it's a constant process of change,
mm-hmm.
if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And when you get out into the sort of IoT and the smaller devices and the listening and monitoring, listening is almost the key aspect, and listening all the way up the tree, up to management, to listen what feedback you're getting, listen to what the customers are telling you, listen to what the systems are telling you, what the staff are telling you, so that you can adapt and not just work on these are the rules and we just stay with these.
Yeah, and we've got a term we use around here, continuous evolution.
Mm-hmm.
So you're constantly reinventing yourself, or constantly reinventing processes and so forth. So bringing this back to the IT department, people talk about digital transformations. They like to talk about kind of several different areas within IT today: web and mobility, big data, IoT, artificial intelligence or machine learning, business intelligence, and then AR, MR, XR, EX, ABC, XYZ. It's all the different terminology these days for what's actually going to be, I believe, rebranded to ER for extended reality, which would embrace all the different types of, just say, facial technologies. So that was interesting. I actually did a presentation a couple of weeks back, and I started off by, because I wanted to kind of get the audience, involved to some extent, and I asked the question: how many here in the room have data anxiety? Is there anyone in the room here that's using LTE instead of Wi-Fi? And of course, if you're at work, right, you're flipping over to Wi-Fi in a heartbeat, so you're not using up all your data plan, right? And then I asked how many people in here, and this was around lunchtime, have data or charge anxiety. Anyone below 25% charge on your cell phone. And then the next question I asked was, anybody have data storage anxiety? Anyone worried if they have enough room to download another app? Or is there enough room here on your cell phone to shoot maybe a 15-minute video if you wanted to capture some of the presentation? And it was interesting. I can kind of tell people were kind of getting a little upset and a little fidgety because of the questions I was asking. But then I followed that up with what I found was a very interesting comment that was just recently made by the CEO of AT&T. And he basically said, cell phones are all going away. And of course, you do that and people kind of go, oh, what's going on here? And I said, oh, by the way, Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, agrees. And of course, now I've really got them kind of looking at me like, who is this guy from Dallas, Texas, right? Because I was actually in Louisiana at the time. But what I was basically saying was where the industry is projected to go with both of these two CEOs is to this extended reality. You no longer have to carry your phone and have that drop anxiety of bust in the face and having to go get your phone fixed and so forth. And I kind of backed all that up with the fact that the last big invention we had for the face, or facial technology, was way back in Benjamin Franklin with bifocals. So there's an area that we really feel that is going to make a big difference a few years down the road in the fact that we'll be wearing our technology, and all the things I talked about with the data anxiety and the charge anxiety and storage and so forth, a lot of that goes away with the cloud and having that connection to the cloud. And another prediction I actually made at the time was, why are we using Wi-Fi? Wi-Fi wasn't necessarily designed to be a mobile-based technology for data transfer. It's pretty much fixed point, built for small business and for the home and so forth. Why aren't we using LTE? And of course, the answer is because it's too expensive. Well, with 5G coming around the corner, it's going to have near wireline speeds. So with the invent of private LTE, you'd stick up a private LTE node inside the building, and once you come into the office, now you're on the company's private LTE network, and there goes that anxiety issue, and it's faster. It was built for mobility and for things moving around. So there's kind of my prediction as to where the future could be going, and that is Wi-Fi kind of goes away, and we move over to wearable technologies. And it was interesting. I actually had a innovations director from a large beverage company in our boardroom a few months back, and was talking to him about different digital transformation technologies, and his interest was around augmented reality, virtual reality, and I just said, hey, why aren't you doing it today? And the answer was, it's too expensive. Hardware's too expensive. I said, well, what if that the price of that technology was, say, $100? And what if you're looking at basically the price of safety goggles? And the whole conversation changed at that point. And then I said, you realize if you don't start now, you're going to be 2 or 3 years behind with your development in augmented reality, virtual reality. So it was an interesting conversation in that it's kind of a wake-up call. And believe it or not, after that meeting, at the end of the day, I was going through some emails and came across an article that was sent to me about a company that's actually targeting for $100 augmented reality glasses. So it was interesting kind of making a prediction right there around augmented reality. And to kind of bring this back around to this smart factories, what if 5-10 years from now, instead of wearing safety glasses, you're wearing augmented reality safety glasses. And what that's going to do for the whole factory of the future, or smart factory. So again, I think I just went on tangent.
No, that's grand. I love that vision, and it would be a paradigm shift again to find that you're not carrying your phone with you, but your phone is there with you. That the word phone meaning communication rather than a physical object, in the same way that maybe you're just carrying a mic or carrying something that's sort of wirelessly charged around with you, but you don't need the rest of it, and it just sort of moves the game again. No, that's cool. But just to bring this back into something sort of that people can work with and take on, where have you been working with businesses for what are the challenges and the sort of a couple of areas that it's good to start with this in a factory?
Well, I guess kind of an interesting use case that we just recently signed a contract to work with a company to do this. I don't know why I'm thinking about this particular use case, but because it's not factory, but it's asset tracking, which in a way you are asset tracking to some extent. But they started their project 6 years ago in IoT. And this particular company is a rental company. They rent vehicles for large organizations for excavation and then all kinds of different types of. It's not a rental car. Let's put it that way. And they were wanting to track all the information from that particular vehicle, the miles per hour and the speed and vibration sensing and oil pressures, all that type of information. And what I found was interesting is that here's a company that's not necessarily IT bent, starting a project that was 6 years old now, and they ran off trying to figure out how to hire engineers to build product to keep the communications costs down, and which made sense because 6 years ago, when you start talking about LTE data, it was very expensive. But they were so obsessed about writing firmware that would reduce that traffic. They spent 6 years on this project and still got nowhere. So I think really when it comes to building a smart factory and putting components and sensors and gateways and edge devices and the whole bit.
Sponsorship of this podcast has been brought to you by Holdingbay, the digital web agency. Holdingbay specialises in working with B2B companies like manufacturers to build better solutions and drive better sales funnels. So if you would like to build a web application or improve your branding and sales funnel, get in contact today. holdingbay.co.uk or call us on 01273 044 019.
To kind of take this out just a little bit further, we can do this today, but I don't necessarily see the adoption rate coming in like it should. But in the factory, if you think about it, safety is a big thing. Using the capability of high-powered edge computing devices, cameras, we can look into a factory and we can determine if someone's wearing a hard hat or not. Now, once we've been able to identify that hard hat's not on someone, we're able to get facial recognition. We take that facial recognition, compare that against the employee database. We take that data that's in that employee database, go over to HR, determine who that manager is for the individual that we just found that wasn't wearing a hard hat. And then we send them a message, or we contact and let them know, Johnny in factory over on this particular area, the floor is not wearing a hard hat. So that's kind of where I see the technology moving, is doing edge computing, using cameras, using sensors. What we've been doing for the last 5 or 10 years, maybe further back when it comes to IoT in the factory, is we've been extracting data from PLCs. We've been taking the data stream that particular device is sensing. What we're also doing is placing sensors on the various different components that are inside a factory, whether those are pumps or cutters or dies. And there's all types of different things, looking for vibration, for different pressures, temperatures, so forth, and collecting that data and sending it back into the cloud. We can use some very simple business logic to determine if the temperature goes too high. Then in that particular case, you may want to send a message to shut down the system, or vibration starting to indicate that you might have a bearing that's going out. And that really comes into the whole predictive maintenance story of data analytics, being able to take that failure prediction and schedule preventative maintenance around that, be able to use that data to be able to figure out root cause. Again, once we've got all this data that's in that factory, and we can predict that a certain component's going to go down, or high value asset, it's part of the whole work in progress for that factory, we can figure out who potentially is the best technician to work on that. We can schedule the technician, we can schedule the parts, and shut down that particular piece of hardware at the time that's convenient for as much as possible. Again, depending obviously with what the predictions are coming out of the analytics. So that's kind of where I'm seeing things. There's kind of a big difference between the preventative maintenance and stepping into this augmented reality, virtual reality world. There's kind of a little bit of a gap, and I'm not quite seeing yet today what's going to be between what we're doing today and getting into using cameras inside a factory to do all types of different analytics and providing data on the edge. So hopefully I'm answering your question there.
Yeah. No, we were speaking with Sam on augmented reality and VR in a previous episode, and he was saying that another asset that they'd found it useful for was sensitive environments, or environments with high risk. That so they were working with an energy company whereby the students they couldn't touch the nuclear factory to work on the components and to work on changes and assessments that were needed until they were full graduates. So there was 3 or 4 years where they could only read about it in books and photographs. When they could move that over to being able to walk through it under sort of pressurized situations, it moved the game forward without actually having to put sensors and cameras and stuff in the factory. But it also moved the game towards remote operation, remote working on things that would involve these things that were actually in the plant.
And if you look at, say, oil rigs as factories, is kind of to some extent, you're producing oil, right? If you think about a oil rig guy running around a platform, and he enters into an area that you have to have certification. And if we can identify who that individual is, we can allow access into that area or deny. And of course, that sounds like, okay, fairly simple logic, but why not connect that into your certification database in HR and make sure that certification is up to date? And therefore, it expired last night. You try to pass through that area, it shuts down. It doesn't allow you in there. So the whole concept of getting all this data from siloed systems throughout the enterprise and consolidating that into insight that's actionable, I think that's a good example of that.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Do you think this is certainly for the applications and things, these sound like skills that have to come from outside the organization and work with them, but do you think there's a skill set or a particular role inside the company that people would already have that's best fit to start this process?
Well, I think first of all, it really comes down to ideation. What are you trying to solve? What issues are you? What what's the KPIs, what's management objectives, so forth and so on. We look at things a little bit different here at Avnet because so many of these projects, people go in and say, okay, I just read this article in Time Magazine. It's IoT and it's augmented reality. This is some really cool stuff. Let's do a project. And that's kind of the wrong way to approach this. What we typically try to do is a workshop. And during that workshop, and I'll just say, my last workshop that I just did was a couple of weeks ago, was at our corporate facilities for our what we call our Global Integration Center. And that's where we're building up equipment, single board computers, putting them in a rack, tying in all the Ethernet and putting that rack in a box and shipping it out, testing and so forth and so on. So we're even using these philosophies or workshops internally and sitting down with the management of that particular division. And we walked out with 8 high priority objectives that we were going to use digital transformation to solve the problems that they identified. So it came down to identifying these different projects and then voting on which particular projects were higher or lower. And then we took those projects and we placed them on a board and kind of took advantage, if you're familiar with the Gartner Magic Quadrant, easy to implement, high impact on the business. And we tried to identify all the projects that were up in that top right sweet spot of the Magic Quadrant. So implementing digital projects or digital transformation just for its sake doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You really need objective reasons for doing all this. So really to answer the question, what I'm really finding today is companies try to go out and build their own ecosystem. And if you look at we've got just recently published what I call an eye chart, because there's so many logos on this. It's hard to even recognize a logo because there's so many there. We've identified edge computing companies, companies that transfer data, whether that's like a Verizon or AT&T or Orange or whatever, and then various different types of cloud providers and the tools that are required. When you start building up these ecosystems, it is enormous. And that's quite frankly why so many companies fail in projects, because they're trying to build these ecosystems without really understanding how things fit together, having a real understanding from A to Z. They will start off with A, B, C, D, and then all of a sudden, right in the middle, M and Q, L, they have no clue what those particular parts are and how they fit into the whole ecosystem. And that's where we're finding a lot of failure. So what I suggest is engage an organization to help you understand digital transformation and projects, and then utilize the areas within your corporation where you do have some skills. Let's say you're currently running on Azure. You might have some skill sets around that to help you understand how the cloud environment is going to affect your enterprise. So it's really a big team effort, not necessarily a group of individuals. So hopefully I've answered your question.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting hearing your vision of where the things are moving and what you're seeing, and I think I'm seeing that in different aspects too. So I do agree with you. Do you think you're enjoying yourself too of having a part of shaping this future too?
I think it's interesting that you asked that question. I do a lot of thinking when I'm doing my pool maintenance at the house, and I was thinking about the fact that I watched a lot of Star Trek episodes when I was a kid, back when almost the original. But and I think just that whole, what's the future? The whole how can we get to all this cool technology, this stuff, and it kind of opens up the whole, I guess, idea how we move from where we are today into various different technologies and just making life easier, right? I mean, I grew up watching also the Jetsons and the Flintstones at the same time, right?
No, I think that's a lovely thing. It almost feels like the world is now that intersection of the worlds of the Flintstones and the Jetsons have met, and now we don't know what the next family will look like. We've got to invent the future and iterate ourselves.
No, I was just going to say, it's just exciting to me to see just all the cool things that are coming out. I mean, you just look at the technology today, even with the latest iPhone, with what, 2 trillion transactions a second. That's just mind blowing. It's hard to even wrap your head around that compared to where things were just 10, 20 years ago. I remember this was back, I think, when I was a teenager. The guy that lived on the other side of the fence from me was actually an employee at IBM. And we were talking because he knew I was interested in computers. And he said, "Can you believe we just invented, it's just right around the corner, a 1 megabit chip? Wow, that's just outstanding. What can we do with all that memory capability, right? I mean, now you can't even take a picture and put it into one megabyte." So anyway, it's just fun to see just how this whole Moore's law is opening up. It's hard to even fathom what things will look like 5 years from now.
Totally. As I said,
I think that's what's exciting.
Yeah, I normally end out the interviews with sort of seeing what do people see as the next 10 years for the industry, but maybe it's not quite possible to even see that. My perspective is it becomes a slight shift whereby things like cars and phones are being shipped as physical products, but the innovation is in the software, and the software keeps changing. And I think that is a paradigm shift that we'll start seeing in more products. I don't know whether you see this too, of the physical product is shipped, but the product keeps iterating, even though the physical product is in the market, because so much of the innovation moves into the software and sort of features and functionality change over time.
Well, just look at with Tesla and all the software that's required for self-driving car, and then just recently at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas this year, they were introducing flying cars. How long have we been waiting for flying cars, right? So there's a lot of software that's going to be required. I'm hearing. Like terabytes of data is going to be exchanged between vehicles to say, "Hey, I'm going this direction. Watch out," or whatever. There's just going to be a ton of data that's going to be flying around all over the place. So
yeah,
that's my prediction.
Yeah, that's
lots of data.
That's the story, and lots of work with so many different fronts and so many different technologies, and none of them perfected. There's plenty of work to do to get this stuff working.
Yeah,
that's great.
Completely agree.
So thanks for coming and joining us today and giving us a glimpse into a future that you're already working on, where you are and with the companies you're working with. If people wanted to get hold of you later, or they're interested in working together, where's best to talk to you?
Well, I'm going to give you my new email address. It's gary.ramsey@avnet.com, and so I'll just spell it out: GARY.RAMSEY@avnet.com.
And you're open to working with sort of large businesses in the States, or do you have particular markets that you're looking to work with at the moment?
Actually, I'm as I mentioned, I'm in Dallas, but just recently was also put in charge of European operations for Avnet when it comes to IoT projects. So if I can't help you, one of my team members can. So please give me a call, or I should say, please send me an email, and I will try to do my best to help out, or find somebody that can. How's that?
Sounds great. It's a good deal. We'll look forward to hearing about what you've been up to in Europe in the next year. Well, thank you for joining us.
Yep, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us today. If you're interested in getting in contact with myself or the guest, you can do so both at the website, cliffnotespodcast.com, or on Twitter, @cliffnotespod.